On their first night as a contract couple, he said, "You're safe now," and her walls finally fell. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main characters. The rain had been falling since morning, turning the glass walls of Anderson Tower into sheets of silver. Inside, the conference room was silent, except for the ticking of the clock and the hum of the city 40 stories below. Mike Anderson sat at the end of the long table, his black suit immaculate, his eyes unreadable. Across from him, Aidan Green clutched her purse with trembling hands, the scent of dish soap still clinging to her uniform. She had been pulled from her shift at the hotel kitchen without warning, told that Mr. Anderson wanted to see her. Mike studied her quietly, the way a man studies a problem he already knows the solution to. "Aidan Green," he said finally, his voice deep and even. "You saved my reputation last night." She blinked, confused. "I did?" "At the charity dinner," he continued. "You blocked a photographer's lens when the wine spilled. If that photo had gone public, it would have cost me millions." Her brows knit together. "I did not even know who you were." "That is exactly why I trust you," he said. Then, leaning forward, he dropped the bombshell. "Marry me. Think of it as a contract." For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. "You what?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. He slid a slim folder across the table. "A 1-year marriage. Legal, private, mutually beneficial. You will be compensated, and I will meet the board's requirement to stay in control of my company." Her throat went dry. "This is insane," she murmured. Mike's expression did not change. "You need money, Miss Green. I need a wife. We can help each other." She flinched at how casually he said it, as if love and marriage were just lines on a spreadsheet. Her mother's hospital bills flashed through her mind, the eviction notice folded inside her apron pocket. He waited, still as a statue. "It is your choice," he said. "But the offer expires in 24 hours. Aidan looked down at the papers. The word contract glared up at her in black ink. She lifted her eyes again, meeting his steady gaze. "Do you always buy people this easily?" she asked. A faint flicker passed through his eyes, something almost like shame. "I do not buy people. I buy time." She hesitated, feeling the walls closing in. Then she whispered, "I will do it. But I want one clause added." Mike raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "No lies," she said. "If I am signing my name, I deserve the truth." For the first time he smiled, small and unexpected. "Then we have a deal." The sound of the pen scratching across the page filled the air, sealing two strangers in a promise neither understood yet. Outside, the storm raged on, lightning flashing against the skyline. And somewhere beneath the thunder, two hearts, one guarded by logic, one battered by survival, had just taken the first step towards something real. Aidan Green walked out of Anderson Tower that night with the rain soaking through her jacket. The contract, still warm from the printer, was tucked into her purse like a dangerous secret. The city lights blurred through her tears, each reflection reminding her that she had just agreed to something she could not fully understand. For the first time in her life, she had signed her name beside a millionaire's, and it did not feel like victory. It felt like surrender. At home, her small apartment smelled faintly of onions and dish soap. Her mother's voice came weakly from the next room, coughing between words. "Aidan, you are home early. Did they let you go from the hotel again?" Aidan forced a smile she did not feel. "No, Mom, just a long day." She set a bowl of soup on the bedside table, the same kind her mother used to make when she was strong enough to stand by the stove. The hospital had released her early, but the bills kept coming, more than Aidan could ever pay from washing dishes and chopping vegetables. When she saw the red stamp "past due" on the envelope near the door, her stomach turned cold. That night she barely slept. Her mind replayed Mike Anderson's words. "You need money, Miss Green. I need a wife." He had said it like an equation, simple, logical, cold. But what kind of man needed to buy a marriage? And what kind of woman agreed to sell her name for 12 months? The ceiling fan hummed above her bed while thunder rolled through the night. By dawn she knew she could not escape the choice. Her mother's medicine would run out within a week. The eviction notice had a date circled in red. If she refused, she would lose everything. At 7 o'clock the next morning, she returned to Anderson Tower. The security guard recognized her and pressed the elevator button without asking. When the doors opened to the top floor, the air felt colder, cleaner and heavier. Mike was already there, standing by the window, his reflection framed by the skyline. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. "You decided?" he said. It was not a question. She took a deep breath. "I will sign. But I want you to know, this is not about money. It is about survival." He studied her, that calm, unreadable face showing the smallest crack of surprise. "Understood," he said. "Survival is something I respect." He handed her a pen, sleek and silver, engraved with his initials. "Read it again if you like. No tricks. It is a clean contract." She opened the folder and scanned the clauses she had memorized last night. No intimacy. No emotional involvement. Appear together at 5 public events. A 1-year duration. Termination by mutual consent. She underlined her own addition in blue ink. No lies. Then she signed her name with a steady hand, even as her heart trembled. When it was done, Mike extended his hand. "Welcome to the arrangement, Mrs. Anderson." The words hit her harder than she expected. Mrs. Anderson. The name sounded foreign, borrowed, like a role in a play. She managed a polite nod. "What happens now?" He looked at his watch. "We make it official. The courthouse is expecting us in 30 minutes. Her pulse quickened. "Today?" He met her eyes with that same calm logic. "There is no reason to wait." The courthouse ceremony was brief, witnessed only by Mike's attorney and a notary public. The clerk asked them to stand close for the photograph. Mike's shoulder brushed hers, warm through the fabric of his suit. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, she felt the world tilt slightly, as if gravity itself had changed direction. Mike turned to her, his expression polite but distant. "Congratulations, Mrs. Anderson," he said softly. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean. Aiden looked at their reflection in a puddle near the steps. 2 people bound by ink, not love. She wondered whether she had saved her family or sold her soul. The ride to his estate was silent except for the sound of tires slicing through wet asphalt. The mansion came into view at the end of a long driveway lined with glass lanterns and manicured trees. It looked less like a home and more like a museum, immaculate and cold. When the car stopped, Mike stepped out first, holding the umbrella over her head. "Welcome home," he said. His voice was polite, but his eyes lingered a moment longer than before. She forced a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson." He hesitated, almost amused. "You might as well call me Mike. It will look strange if you do not." She nodded, though her throat felt tight. "All right, Mike." As she stepped inside, the marble floor reflected her image back at her, smaller, dimmer, almost swallowed by the space. The housekeeper led her upstairs, explaining schedules, rooms, and expectations, but Aiden barely listened. In her pocket, she could feel the folded copy of the contract pressing against her leg like a reminder. 1 year, 12 months to pretend. And maybe, just maybe, to find out what kind of man Mike Anderson really was. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Anderson estate, painting gold streaks across the marble floors. The mansion felt like another planet, silent, immaculate, intimidating. Aiden Green stood in the hallway, clutching the copy of the contract she had signed only 24 hours earlier. The ink was dry, but her heart was not. She had woken up in a room that looked like a hotel suite, not a bedroom. The bed was perfectly made, the sheets too crisp to touch, and the scent of expensive cologne lingered in the air. She half expected to wake up and realize it had been a dream. But when she saw the silver pen with Mike Anderson's initials lying on the nightstand, the truth returned like a chill. Downstairs, Mike was already in the breakfast room, scanning a stack of documents. He looked up as she entered, dressed not in a suit but in a light sweater, sleeves rolled to the elbow. For a moment, he looked almost human. "Good morning," he said without looking up again. "Good morning," she replied carefully, unsure of the new rules. "You can sit." The staff prepared breakfast. She hesitated before sitting at the opposite end of the long table. A housekeeper placed a plate in front of her omelet, toast, perfectly arranged fruit. It smelled incredible, but she barely touched it. Mike spoke again, tone calm and detached. "Aiden, there are a few things we should go over. Our contract includes certain appearances. 5 major events starting with the corporate gala next week. You will receive media coaching and wardrobe styling this afternoon." She blinked. "Media coaching? Wardrobe styling?" He nodded. "It is necessary. You are Mrs. Anderson now, and appearances matter." Her stomach tightened at the way he said it. Mrs. Anderson. It still sounded like a borrowed name. "And what about privacy?" she asked quietly. The contract says no interference with personal life. Mike looked up at her for the first time that morning. Correct. You are free to do whatever you wish, as long as it does not compromise the image of this marriage. The words felt like invisible chains wrapping around her wrists. After breakfast, a stylist arrived with racks of dresses and boxes of heels that looked too expensive to touch. Aiden stood awkwardly as they pinned, adjusted, and discussed color palettes, as if she were an object on display. Mike passed by once, paused at the door, and said simply, "Go with the navy one. It suits you." Then he disappeared back into his office. Hours later, when the house grew quiet again, Aiden wandered through the endless hallways. Every room was perfect organized, symmetrical, lifeless. She stopped at a closed door near the end of the corridor. Inside was a small office lined with photos of a woman she did not recognize. The woman had warm eyes and a gentle smile. In one frame, she was holding a child, Mike, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Aiden turned when she heard his voice behind her. "You found my mother's room." He stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. "She passed away when I was 13. I keep this space as it was." Aiden swallowed. "It is beautiful." He nodded once, then closed the door softly, as if shutting away the past. "Dinner is at 7, he said, and walked off without another word. That evening, they sat at opposite ends of a table large enough for 20 people. The clinking of silverware echoed in the silence. Aiden forced herself to ask something, anything. "You said your mother passed when you were young. Did she cook for you?" Mike's fork paused midair. "Every night," he said after a moment. "Until the fire." Aiden's voice softened. "I am sorry." He gave a faint nod. "You could not have known." For a brief second, his eyes met hers. Not cold, not distant, but full of something she could not name. Then he cleared his throat and returned to his plate. Later, in her room, Aiden sat on the bed holding the folded copy of the contract. Her edition, No Lies, was circled in blue ink. She thought about the way he looked at his mother's photo, the way his voice broke when he mentioned the fire. There were lies that lived in silence, too. She got up and went to the window. The garden below was bathed in moonlight, the fountain whispering softly in the night. For a moment, she imagined what it would be like to live here for real, not as a contract wife, not as someone pretending, but as herself. Then her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "How is he treating you, sweetie? I hope you are safe." Aiden stared at the words for a long time before typing back, "I am safe, Mom, I promise." She pressed send, even though her chest felt heavy, because deep down she was not sure if safety and freedom could ever exist in the same place. The following week passed in a blur of fittings, etiquette lessons, and endless instructions about how to stand, smile, and speak. Every morning, a car picked Aiden up and drove her to a downtown studio where a poised instructor taught her posture, pronunciation, and the language of high society. She practiced balancing a glass on her head, greeting reporters with a half smile, and holding her chin at a precise angle for photographs. The teacher would clap her hands sharply. "You are Mrs. Anderson now. You must look like you belong." At night, Aiden returned to the mansion exhausted. The marble floors no longer impressed her. They only echoed her footsteps, reminding her how small she felt in this new world. Mike worked late every night, his office lights glowing behind frosted glass until long past midnight. Sometimes she would pass by and hear the faint sound of his voice through the door, clipped and efficient as he negotiated deals worth more than she could imagine. One evening, she gathered the courage to knock. "Dinner is ready," she said softly. He looked up, surprised. "I told the staff to leave it in the kitchen." "They did," she said, "but food gets cold when no one eats it." Something in her tone made him close the laptop. For the first time, he followed her downstairs. The dining room felt different that night. No staff, no distance. Just two people sitting across from each other. Aiden had cooked simple pasta, her way of rebelling against the polished perfection of the chef's meals. Mike took a bite, paused, and gave a small nod. "It is good," she smiled faintly. "Thank you. It is edible, at least." He looked at her carefully. "Why do you keep cooking when there are people paid to do it for you?" She shrugged. "Because cooking is something I understand. It makes the world quieter." For a moment he said nothing. Then, almost under his breath, "I used to think that about building companies." It was a small exchange, but it softened something between them. They began to talk not about money or business, but about ordinary things. Music, books, the rain that would not stop falling that week. Later that night, Aiden walked back to her room and stopped by his office door. Through the glass, she saw him standing by the window, his silhouette framed by the city lights. For a second, she wondered what kind of loneliness a man like him carried. The next morning brought a different kind of test. Mike's assistant handed her a folder labeled Gala. Inside were photographs of people she had never met: investors, partners, journalists. The event would be held that weekend, and the entire world of commerce would be watching. The stylist fitted her in a deep navy gown, smooth as liquid under the light. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The reflection staring back was poised, elegant, and calm, but her hands were trembling. That evening, as the car approached the hotel ballroom, Aiden's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it over the sound of the rain. Flashbulbs burst the moment they stepped out. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones pushed forward. "Mr. Anderson, is your marriage real or just for publicity?" "Mrs. Anderson, how does it feel to marry one of the richest men in the city?" Aiden froze. Mike placed a steady hand at her back and leaned in just enough for her to hear him whisper, "Breathe." She forced a small smile and turned toward the nearest camera. "If it were for publicity," she said softly, "I would not be shaking this much." The reporters laughed. The tension broke, and the moment passed like a sigh. Mike looked at her then, genuinely an expression of quiet respect flickering across his face. As they walked into the ballroom, the orchestra swelled and chandeliers glimmered overhead. For the first time since signing that contract, Aiden Green felt the world shift just slightly. Not because she looked like she belonged, but because, for one fleeting moment, she actually did. The gala ended hours later, but the echo of applause still lingered in Aiden's mind as their car pulled away from the hotel. Mike sat beside her, silent, his profile lit by the soft glow of passing streetlights. Outside, the city shimmered with rain and celebration. But inside the car, there was only quiet, comfortable, not cold. When they reached the estate, Aiden kicked off her heels and let out a long breath she had been holding all evening. Mike followed her gaze as she looked out over the dark garden. "You did well tonight," he said simply. "Better than I expected." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "That sounds almost like a compliment." "It is," he replied, his tone lighter than usual. "You were poised, sincere, and honest. People saw that. It matters more than you think." She smiled faintly, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. "I just told the truth. I was nervous. And that is exactly why they believed you," he said. For a while, they stood near the large window, the reflection of the city lights dancing across the glass. There was something different in his expression, a quiet admiration that made Aiden's heart shift in ways she could not name. The following days moved with a new rhythm. The staff noticed how the tension in the house seemed to soften. Mike still worked long hours, but he began joining her for dinner more often. Sometimes, they shared coffee in the kitchen before he left for meetings. It became their quiet ritual. She brewed it too strong, and he pretended not to mind. One night, rain tapped softly against the tall windows while thunder rolled far in the distance. Aiden sat on the sofa reading through her old recipe book, the pages worn and spotted with sauce stains. Mike entered, jacket slung over one shoulder, and paused. "You still carry that thing everywhere?" She smiled. "It is my map when I get lost." He sat across from her, watching the flicker of the fireplace. "Lost?" he repeated. "That is a word I know too well." They talked for a long time about his mother, the fire that took her, and the guilt he had carried for decades. He confessed he had been the one who left the stove on that night, a child too eager to help. Aiden listened, silent, the truth sinking deep. When his voice cracked, she reached across the table and touched his hand lightly. "You were a boy," she said softly, "and you have been trying to make up for it ever since." He looked at her then, and something unspoken passed between them: trust, fragile but real. Later that night, as Aiden turned to leave, he stopped her at the door. "Aiden," he said quietly. She turned, waiting. He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "You asked for one rule when we started this. No lies. I have kept it. But there is something I did not expect." Her pulse quickened. "What is that?" He took a breath, his voice low and steady. "You make this house feel alive again." Aiden froze. It was not a confession of love, but it was the closest thing she had ever heard from him. The walls she had built so carefully began to tremble. When she went to bed that night, she could still feel the warmth of his hand in hers. Outside, the rain kept falling, but for the first time since she entered this mansion, Aiden Green felt something she had not felt in a long time: safe. A few weeks later, the mansion no longer felt like a museum. The air had changed. Laughter sometimes echoed down the hallways, soft and hesitant, but real. Mike Anderson began spending more time away from his office, surprising even himself. He joined Aiden in the kitchen, where the smell of garlic and butter filled the space. He still wore his pressed shirts and rolled-up sleeves, but the sight of him slicing vegetables beside her became strangely natural. One evening, while they prepared dinner together, Aiden noticed a faint burn scar on his wrist as he reached for the pan. She looked at it quietly, remembering the story about his mother. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. He paused, glancing down. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Mostly when I forget to be careful." She smiled gently. "Scars do that. They remind us of what we try to bury." He met her eyes, and the silence that followed was heavier than words. They ate on the patio that night, the city lights shimmering in the distance. The air smelled of rain and rosemary. Aiden leaned back in her chair, relaxed in a way she had not been since the day she signed the contract. Mike poured her a glass of wine, his movements slow, deliberate. "You are getting good at this," she teased. "Next thing I know, you will open your own restaurant," he smirked. "If it comes with you as the head chef, maybe?" Her laughter came easily, light and genuine, but beneath the comfort, something unspoken grew. The space between them began to shift, no longer employer and employee, no longer strangers bound by paper. It was subtle, a quiet current that neither dared to name. That change showed itself one cold night when the power went out during a storm. The mansion, usually bright and unshakable, plunged into darkness. Lightning flashed, followed by the crack of thunder that made Aiden flinch. She tried to steady her breath, but memories of her childhood of being alone in a storm after her father left rose up fast. Mike found her in the hallway, flashlight in hand. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," she said quickly, her voice trembling more than she wanted. He held the beam steady, lighting her face. "You are shaking. It is just storms. I never liked them." Without another word, he handed her the flashlight and took her hand, guiding her to the living room. He started the fireplace with practiced ease, the glow filling the space with warmth. When she sat down, he placed a blanket over her shoulders. "You are safe now," he said quietly. Her breath caught. The words were simple, but they struck something deep inside her. She looked up at him, eyes glistening in the firelight. "You cannot say things like that," she whispered. "Not when this is just a contract." He hesitated, his voice softer now. "Maybe it started that way, but not everything that begins on paper has to stay there." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the steady rhythm of rain outside. Then she spoke, almost to herself. "I do not know how to trust what is real anymore." "Idom." He sat beside her, not too close, not too far. "Then let me prove it, one truth at a time." Aiden turned toward the flames, her heart racing. The storm outside began to fade, leaving only the steady hiss of rain. For the first time, she was not sure if she wanted the storm to end. Because in the flicker of the firelight, the lines of their contract were beginning to blur, replaced by something fragile, something alive, something dangerously close to love. The calm that had settled over the Anderson estate did not last. Good things rarely stayed quiet for long. A week after the storm, Mike Anderson's world began to tremble again this time, not from thunder, but from whispers. It started with a headline. "Contract marriage scandal?" Sources claim Mike Anderson's wife was a hired actress. The word spread online faster than wildfire. Every news outlet picked it up, adding their own twist, their own poison. Photos of Aiden at the gala flashed across the internet, paired with accusations and speculation. Aiden was in the kitchen when she saw it. Her hands froze over the sink, soap slipping through her fingers. "No," she whispered. Her phone buzzed again and again, messages from coworkers, journalists, strangers, gold digger, fraud, fake wife. Each word cut deeper than the last. When Mike returned home that evening, the house felt colder than usual. She was waiting in the hallway, holding her phone out with trembling hands. "Is it true?" she asked. "Did someone leak the contract?" He stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. "It appears so." Her voice rose. "Appears? Everyone knows, Mike. They know everything." "I will handle it," he said sharply. "Handle it," she repeated, tears stinging her eyes. "You mean cover it up again? Pretend it never happened?" He exhaled slowly, forcing calm. "You knew this was temporary, Aiden. You knew the risk." The words hit harder than he intended. She stepped back as if struck. "You think this is about the contract?" Her voice broke. "This is about my mother, my job, my name. You promised no lies, remember? You told me I was safe here." Mike looked away, guilt flickering across his face, but pride kept him silent. "Go upstairs," he said quietly. The less you say to anyone, the better. She stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked away. By the next morning, the story had reached investors and board members. The company's stock began to dip. At an emergency meeting, several executives demanded damage control and a public separation. Mike listened in silence while the chairman said coldly, "End it, Mike. Annul the marriage. We cannot afford another scandal." He drove home that night with the weight of the world on his shoulders. When he entered the house, Aiden was already packing. The contract lay folded on the table, her handwriting, no lies visible through the thin paper. "I am leaving," she said without turning around. He swallowed hard. "If you stay, I can fix this." She shook her head. "You cannot fix what was never real." Mike's voice cracked despite himself. "Aiden." She faced him then, tears glimmering in her eyes. Do not say my name like that. You have everything, Mike, money, power, control. But you have never learned how to keep something that matters." She picked up her bag and walked toward the door. He stood frozen, every instinct screaming to stop her, but pride kept him rooted to the floor. When the door closed behind her, the silence that followed was deafening. That night, Mike sat alone in his office, staring at the shattered reflection of himself in the dark glass. For the first time, he realized what it meant to lose something that could not be bought back. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft at first, then heavy, like the sky itself was trying to remind him of the promise he had broken. "You are safe now." Days passed, but the silence inside Anderson Tower grew heavier. The board had made their decision clear: dissolve the marriage, hold a press conference, and restore the company's reputation. Mike Anderson had built an empire from nothing, but for the first time he could not bring himself to fight for numbers or control. He could only think of the woman who had walked out of his life carrying her suitcase, and his heart with it. He sat in his office long after midnight, staring at the city below. Contracts, shareholders, profits, none of it mattered now. In front of him lay the torn copy of the agreement that had started it all. He traced the words "no lies" written in Aiden's handwriting and whispered, "You kept your promise. I did not." By morning, the news cycle had turned merciless. Cameras waited outside the company building, ready to record his downfall. His assistant reminded him, "Sir, the press conference begins in 30 minutes. The statement is prepared." Mike closed the folder slowly. "Not that statement." "Sir, I am going to tell the truth," he said. When he stepped up to the podium, the room went silent. Dozens of microphones pointed toward him, flashing lights blinding his eyes. He began with a steady voice. "Yes, my marriage began as a contract. That part is true. I needed to protect my company, and I thought a transaction could solve a human problem." He paused, looking straight into the cameras. "But the woman I married, Aiden Green, is not a liar or an opportunist. She is the most honest person I have ever met, and if my shareholders need someone to blame, blame me." Gasps filled the room. A reporter shouted, "Are you saying you fell in love with her?" Mike's lips curved slightly. "I am saying that she reminded me what real value is, and it was never in dollars." He walked off the stage before anyone could stop him. For the first time in years, he felt lighter. The company might fall, but he finally knew what he was willing to lose. That evening, as the city lights blinked awake, Aiden stood outside the community kitchen where she had been volunteering. She was ladling soup into a bowl when her phone buzzed with messages clips from the conference, Mike's speech spreading everywhere. The headline now read, "Anderson admits truth defends his wife publicly." Her eyes filled with tears. The man who once spoke only in logic had finally spoken with heart. She closed her eyes, letting the noise of the street fade around her. The next day, she found him standing outside the kitchen's front gate, drenched in rain. No umbrella this time. He looked exhausted but certain. "You should be home," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "I am, if you will have me." Aiden stood frozen. Her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and forgiveness. "You gave up everything," she whispered. He shook his head. "Not everything. I finally stopped hiding behind what I built." For a long moment, neither moved. Then she stepped forward, holding the worn contract in her hands. "You tore this once," she said softly. "Maybe it is time we rewrite it." He looked at her, rain dripping from his hair, eyes steady. No clauses, no signatures. She smiled through her tears. Just truth. And for the first time since the beginning, Mike Anderson reached for her hand, not out of obligation but choice. A few months later, the world had stopped talking about the scandal. Anderson Group had stabilized under new leadership, but Mike Anderson no longer cared for titles or headlines. He had traded glass boardrooms for a quieter life, one built not on contracts but on choices freely made. The old community kitchen had become their shared project, rebuilt and expanded with his investment but guided entirely by Aiden's heart. They named it Safe Haven Kitchen. Every day, families and workers lined up for warm meals, served by the woman who once cooked in silence and the man who had finally learned how to listen. It was a cold morning in early winter when Mike arrived carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Aiden stood at the counter, tying her apron, her hair pulled back loosely. "You are late," she teased. He handed her a mug. "You sound like my old board of directors." She laughed. "Maybe because I am the only one who can tell you what to do now." He grinned. "And I have never been happier to be bossed around." Alright? They worked side by side through the lunch rush, serving soup, passing bread, greeting strangers like old friends. When the crowd thinned, Aiden noticed a small box on the counter. "What is this?" she asked. Mike looked almost nervous. "Something unfinished." She opened it slowly. Inside was a folded piece of paper, their old contract, now rewritten in his handwriting. Only one line was printed clearly in the middle. "From contract to choice. You are my only truth." "You." Aiden looked up, eyes shining. Mike reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver ring. "It is not a deal this time," he said quietly. "It is a promise." Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, unable to speak. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand trembling slightly. Around them, the light from the window caught the falling snow, turning the air bright and soft. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was full of everything that had been broken and rebuilt between them: trust, forgiveness, love. Finally, Aiden whispered, "Do you remember what you said to me that night? You are safe now." He smiled, eyes warm. "And I meant it, because being with you is the only place I have ever been safe." Outside, laughter from the street drifted through the doorway, blending with the hum of the kitchen. Aiden leaned her head against his shoulder, the silver ring glinting under the morning light. The world moved on, but for Mike Anderson and Aiden Green, this was their forever: no contracts, no conditions, only love freely chosen.